Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula says the South African National Defence Force will not be deployed in Parliament, but police will be in control. Mapisa Nqakula dismissed earlier allegations as unfounded and said the SANDF will only be on standby in the event that they are required.
Minister, can you please clarify the decision to deploy the Defence Force during the State of the Nation?
Thank you very much for allowing us to explain this to the South African public. Firstly, Sophie, the South African National Defence Force never deploys internally here without authorization from the Commander-in-Chief, who is the President of the Republic of South Africa. Secondly, when the President does that, he only does it because the Minister of Police would have made a request to the President for the deployment of the South African National Defence Force in support of the police, right? Thirdly, if and when the Minister of Police makes that request, he only does that informed by the assessment, the security assessment, which has been conducted. So it would be that there's a security assessment which has been conducted by both the police and state security, and that the outcome of that assessment makes a determination as the kind of forces you need. So in this case, indeed, we have signed a request for the President to sign a presidential minute, and of course the President, having done that, having signed that presidential minute, then informs Parliament, the Speaker and the Chairperson of the NCOP. And this would then be tabled to Parliament under announcements and tablings. So I'm just saying that there's nothing strange or new, and there's nothing untoward about the processes which have been followed, but I want to assure South Africans that here there is no abuse of state power. In any circumstances where there's a request made that we should deploy, we do so in support of the police. It does not end, by the way, the letter to the Speaker, or even the announcements, I would imagine, say we would be on standby for deployment. So in this instance, the Defence Force would be on standby in the event a calamity would occur. One of the things which people never consider when talking about the Defence Force is the fact that the Defence Force does not just have the Army. You have the Navy, you have the Air Force, you also have the South African Military Health Service. In the event of a calamity in the country occurring, for instance, you are able to send, for rescue purposes, the people from the South African Military Health Services. So when people hear the mere mention of the South African National Defence Force, immediately the assumption is that it is those who will be carrying weapons, it is those who will be suppressing some form of rebellion. It is not about that. There are other services which we provide. Let me also make another example. When there are big events, for instance, right, and you require the services of hospitality services, you are able, for instance, to get services from the Navy, because we have people who have specialized in that area of work. So I'm just saying, I think it's unfortunate that this issue is reported in a manner such that it gives an impression to the ordinary South Africans that the Army is going to be a buzz in Parliament. By the way, in Parliament, during the State of the Nation address, we always have the ceremonial guard, which is the soldiers will be marching, will be in the streets, etc., etc. And for that, you do not require the President's authority, right? So you don't require a presidential minute. But for standby, what it means is that in the base here in Cape Town somewhere, you will have people who are waiting in the event of a calamity, in the event of a need arising that you need the Defence Force to come in and give support to the police, that's what will happen. It does not mean that the South African National Defence Force will be your first line of defence in Parliament. You've never seen soldiers in Parliament. Even when there was a crisis which occurred the other year, when people actually tried to destabilize and cause ungovernability during the State of the Nation, which was 2015, I think. Even then, you never saw men and women in uniform. You never saw them in uniform. So so your first line will always be Parliament. And then outside of Parliament, you will then have the police. You will not find the members of the South African National Defence Force deployed to prevent people from demonstrating, etc., etc. But of course, once the situation determines that you now require, the police are not in control of the situation, and they then make a proposal that the Defence Force comes in, then the Defence Force comes in, like it happens in any other country. So you are not having members of the South African National Defence Force deploying as a first line of defence at the State of the Nation. It's not like that. It is not true. And I think we need to correct that. Defence Force always comes in support of the police, but in this case, they will be on standby in the event they are required, in the event a calamity occurs.
Did the president sign an authorization or give
Of
permission
course.
to that
Of course.
previously, and perhaps when was
It's not the first time. We've had it before. It's not the first time. We've had a request at the beginning of 2015, and the president did sign a presidential minute, having received a letter from the police. President then forwarded it to us, and we signed a presidential minute, which was eventually signed by the president himself. And there's nothing wrong with that. Even when we had Operation Fiela, because you are deploying your army internally here, President receives a letter from the police, then directs the Minister of Defense to prepare a presidential minute, and then the President signs. And I'm just saying that I don't know why. I think we've seen so much in the past during apartheid days when we saw the military literally roaming the streets of South Africa and doing all manner of things to suppress the people of South Africa. But precisely because of that experience, remember when we wrote the Constitution and when we wrote the Defence Act, we made sure that we confine, we restrict, and we have all oversight mechanisms. Part of this presidential minute and the fact that the Minister of Police will be the one who makes a request, and the fact that there's a presidential minute, which is a paper trail, and that President then informs Parliament, it's part of the built-in oversight mechanisms, which we, when we came into democracy, which we said these are the processes which should be followed in the event you were to deploy the Defence Force internally.